Have you ever wondered what your dreams mean? Join us in Dream School at thisjungianlife.com and find out. Jung wrote, "Dreams are a little hidden door in the innermost and most secret recesses of the soul."
Dream School is a unique, self-paced online program you can start at any time that unlocks access to your inner world. Our 12-month program provides the support, knowledge, and guidance you need to reach within, decipher your personal dream code, and harness it to optimize your life. By enrolling, you'll join an affirming community of fellow travelers, each pursuing a unique quest.
And it's fun. Join us on an adventure to wholeness and healing through understanding your dreams. Go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Dream School. You'll be taken to our secure checkout. Once you join, you'll get immediate access to our first 3 modules. You can get started right away. We look forward to seeing you there.
Welcome to This Jungian Life. 3 good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
This week on the podcast, we thought we'd do something a little different. We all appreciate how certain images show up repeatedly in different people's dreams, and these images often carry such power and show up in varied ways. And of course, these are archetypal images. So we thought we'd start by taking a look at the image of the alligator or the crocodile, a very, very common visitor in people's dreams. Luckily, not usually in people's daily lives, but in their dreams, yes. I think probably most of us at one time or another have had an alligator or a crocodile dream. And of course, there are many myths about crocodiles. Crocodiles and alligators have played an important role in various religions. And so what we've done actually is we've gone back through our wonderful catalog of nearly 2,000 dreams that we've received from all of our listeners since we started the podcast in 2018 and pulled out some of the very best alligator and crocodile dreams. And we're just going to circumambulate this image as an archetype and pull up examples from these wonderful dreams.
I can't help but reflect on the fact that of all the animals that people dream about, we are interested in the alligator and crocodile dreams. So we may go on from here, but there is something very toothsome and gripping about this particular image.
Toothsome. I'll have to remember that word. I'm going to have to use that several times today just to roll it around.
There is something that is really and truly fascinating about the image of the alligator. And most of us do not live in any kind of daily proximity to such creatures, but it grabs our imagination, it grabs hold of psyche, and it does show up in our dreams. And kids are fascinated by alligators and crocodiles. So they are such primal images of creatures that live in the water and in the swamp, which is so generative of life, and also the polarity of sudden death and destruction, because these creatures can move fast when they are after prey.
Right. They sort of wait. They're kind of ambush predators, isn't that right? And
yes.
They kind of wait very silently and very still, and they can't really be seen, just their nostrils and their eyes kind of above the water. And then they kind of explode out of the water to grab their prey and their jaws are tremendously powerful.
I think that the fact that they're hundreds of millions of years old with apparently very little change over that time means that there's something incredibly successful about the way in which they function and adapt to the environment. And I have to say that I am not spooked by many animals, but I find alligators and crocodiles particularly creepy and disturbing. And because I have my place on the water in North Carolina, and because of global warming, alligators are beginning to migrate up into eastern North Carolina. Just a few miles down the road, there is a Mill Pond State Park, which has an enormous alligator population. And so I find myself scanning the water frequently, looking for evidence of alligators. And luckily in our little area, we haven't sighted any. But I have to tell you that the day I see one, that is going to change my relationship to ever getting in that water again. It's really, it's not even anxiety. It's that true sense of primordial fear.
Yeah.
They are stealth predators, so you don't see them. They blend in and you're surprised and attacked out of nowhere. You really can't see it coming. And that's really scary.
So leaning into that image, and Joseph, I'm wanting to kind of use you as an example here. That, I mean, obviously there's the very practical, very reality-oriented concern about alligators turning up in your backyard. But if we think about your fear as a psychological experience, here you are, you've got this beautiful water that is inviting as a kind of playground. And then there's this fear of this sort of invisible danger, this primordial, archaic content that could be hunting you. And so if that were a dream, for example, we might speculate that there's some kind of very ancient, far from ego, unconscious content, sort of like a denizen of the unconscious swimming around in the waters of the unconscious, that could spring up at any moment and take your little ego down. That can sometimes be an aspect of how the unconscious works, that our ego thinks that it's in control, and yet we can be preyed upon by these ancient contents of the unconscious, whether it's a fear or a dread or a kind of very instinctual impulse that overturns our ego attitude.
I think that's particularly apt. And while there could be lots of things that bubble up from the unconscious, jump out at us, a neurotic moment in some interaction, but the idea that something can leap out from the water, grab you, and never let you go is a magnitude of power that is hard to face. And particularly as a modern person, hard to face that in our environment, particularly here on the East Coast. For the most part, the Atlantic Ocean is relatively benign compared to the Pacific. And also, we live in a very temperate climate on the East Coast. So I'm not really accustomed to having to adapt to life-threatening circumstances around me. So it really does change how my psyche works around it. But I'm also thinking about experiences that I had in the psych hospital, which I think are comparable to this alligator or crocodile lunge, where people who have not had a history, let's say, of severe mental illness suddenly have a psychotic break, and the content is so frightening, so relentless, that they wind up getting brought inpatient to the hospital in a true state of horror at what the unconscious is doing to them and the images that it's providing. And to me, that's a real example of being gripped by the alligator or crocodile and not having a sense that anything's going to let you go.
Right. It drags you under and drowns you.
And keeps you there. And we hope that in those situations that medication, for instance, might loosen the jaws of the alligator. But it's no guarantee, frankly.
That's such a great illustration of how the alligator and the unconscious in its more terrifying, devouring aspect is like that, and that the unconscious can be that powerful.
You know, one of the things that we do when we work with symbols is we consider, in the case of an animal, for example, its natural qualities. And that helps us understand what role it might be playing in dreams. So we've talked a little bit about that already, that these are very old animals, that they're stealth predators, that they have these tremendous jaws and these tremendous teeth, all of which kind of give us a hint about what kind of psychic content might be outpictured or what this energy might be like in the unconscious. There's another important element of crocodilians, and that is their maternal quality, that they will roll the eggs around in their mouths as the babies are getting ready to hatch to help the young ones out of the eggs, and then they will carry their young in their mouth very gently and very lovingly, and they will protect their babies for up to a year. So this is fairly unusual in the reptile world for there to be any kind of maternal functioning. And so crocodiles are also known, they were known in ancient Egypt. The god Sobek was a crocodile-headed god, and he was known for being vicious and destructive and aggressive and animalistic, just as you might expect. But he was also known for being protective and even being a healer. He became associated with Isis as a healer of Osiris after Osiris was murdered by Set. So crocodiles can carry these negative qualities symbolically. Some of Sobek's epithets were he who eats while he mates and pointed of teeth, but he was also known for being protective. And one of the elements that's associated with the crocodile is the terrible mother.
Which brings up the question of what happens after that first year of the crocodile tending her children, and they then go into the environment, and do they become just lunch, which I think may be true.
Well, I think that it's a paradoxical and complex image, this association between the alligator, the crocodile, and the mother. I think that, Neumann talks about the terrible mother in his book, The Great Mother. He talks about the negative elemental character, and crocodile imagery would be used in different mythologies to point to this quality of the mother, or the feminine, if you will, this kind of devouring, I think, is the main element. And Neumann talks about inhuman, extrahuman, and superhuman quality of these images, and that they're just filled with dread and fear, which I think is what you were talking about, Joseph, just this incredible, very gut-level fear that comes up when you think about encountering one of these. So Neumann says that this is indicative of the devouring nature of the unconscious. The unconscious is associated with the feminine. It gives life to consciousness, but it also can tend to suck us back down into the muck, which is exactly what you were talking about with people going through a psychosis, Joseph. It's like the devouring unconscious has clamped our psyches in its mouth and is pulling us back under. So there's a way that when we talk about the terrible mother, it's that which can be generative, but can also reclaim us, whether we're talking about our lives or our consciousness. But of course, she can also be a protective maternal mother, the crocodile, because she is protective of her children.
So we're really talking here about the extremes or the polarities that this image embraces of the nurturing and the primordial soup from which life emerges, in which the alligator lives, and this sudden devouring aspect, and its relationship, how it images a relationship between consciousness and the unconscious. So I'm going to loop this in with another Egyptian god, Geb, and expand on this image a little bit. He was a god of the earth, and he too had these sort of polar qualities. And he personified both the fertile earth of Egypt and the Nile, and how the Nile would flood every year, and the barren desert. So an image, if you will, of both life and death. He was also the god who, after death, would transport the soul of the deceased into the afterlife if that person had merited it. So the idea, the myth was that the soul would be weighed, and if it was heavier than a feather, you wouldn't be sent on, in which case you got devoured by the crocodile. They talk about, Geb opening his jaws as a chthonic or earthy, primordial kind of deity, and associated with both the underworld and the afterlife.
I think what strikes me about that particular amplification is that in the Hall of Mot, when the heart was weighed, if it was found deficient, in a way it was rotten. And crocodiles and alligators eat carrion flesh. They eat dead flesh. They are, like vultures, part of the cleaning crew of nature. So tossing the heart that's rotten, morally speaking, into this recycle bin of the great alligator, the great crocodile, would make sense in the ancient psyche, and that it would be, in a sense, recycled. So I can understand how that symbol would work, and I can also understand how, much like in Judeo-Christian mythology, the idea of hell is, in a sense, used to frighten the populace out of poor behavior. The idea of being eaten by Amet or Geb is also a greatly motivating idea, if you can buy into that, that there's a consequence for your heart not being in the right shape by the time you die. I was also thinking about the eruptive power of the unconscious and its ability to grab us. And I don't know if I'm sure we've all seen this on nature programs, but that these crocodiles will leap out of the water at tremendous speeds. They grab their prey, pull it into the water, and then they begin to spin wildly. And in the spinning of it, they'll often kill the animal, but also drown it, overwhelm it. And I had recently seen a movie that I think, in a sense, exemplifies this. It's a charming little movie called The Electrical Life of Louis Wain. And the star is Benedict Cumberbatch. And it's a docudrama. Louis Wain was an illustrator, a kind of turn of the 20th century illustrator who was, based just on what I observed in the movie, seemed to be schizoid and troubled in that way. But he developed this way of painting his cats in these highly psychedelic and human ways that captured the imagination of the British public. He was a book illustrator, but as his life proceeded and the unfortunate death of his wife, he became wildly psychotic towards the end. And as he was famous for these beloved images of cats in these anthropomorphic situations, he was given opportunities to lecture. And once he began lecturing, he began to talk about how electricity was this enormous evolutionary force, and that cats were particularly on a grand path of evolution, and eventually they were going to start walking on two legs, they were going to turn blue, and they were going to begin to adopt human language. And in very serious, passionate ways, he would lecture to the British public about this. But over the course of the movie, and I recommend it highly, you can kind of see the way the unconscious grabs him and begins spinning him in the water so that he can't quite tell what's reasonable and unreasonable.
I think that's a great image of what happens in a process like this, is that you just get all spun around and you don't know what's real and what's not. And you're kind of slowly drowning.
And there's a cost for that. Of course, there's very little support, both historically and certainly currently in Western culture, for people who are caught by the crocodiles of life.
I'm thinking back to, well, this perhaps is no surprise, but the link between the crocodile or the alligator and the mother, and how, crocodiles are certainly the best mothers in the reptile world, I think. I don't know, there might be some herpetologists out there who are going to write in and say, no, you missed this. But anyway, they're known for being, kind of good mothers for reptiles. But if you're a human and you have a crocodile show up in your dream, and it seems to be related to this mother imagery, that's going to be very interesting to me, because of course we just talked about the crocodile as the image of the terrible mother. But even in her role as the protective mother, a crocodile mother is not very warm. She might do sort of the minimum to keep her offspring safe, but it's still a very reptilian kind of experience. And one of the reasons that crocodiles kind of fascinate and frighten me is their eyes. Like most other reptiles, really, there's just no resonance or warmth in the eye of a crocodile or an alligator. You feel, if they're looking at you, that they're just looking at you as potential prey. I'm thinking about times I've seen them at the zoo or something. There's no, having a mammal look at you feels really different. Like your dog looks at you and you can see that the dog is delighted to see you. You don't see that with a crocodile.
They're not tail wagging.
No.
I hope not.
They are incredibly primordial. You are lunch. I have to tell this story about my sister, who loved reptiles as a child. And one day we went to the pet store, which was her place. Other people might have gone to the candy store, the drugstore. She was always at the pet store. And she saw a small alligator, maybe 2 feet long, that was for sale. And I remember that it was $8 and some cents. And she didn't have all that money. I had some at home. Anyway, we went back soon after that and we bought this alligator. She bought it and brought it home. And there it was, lying in these aquariums that, given her predilection for reptiles, we had plenty of aquariums. So there it was in the aquarium. And she decided she would reach down and pick it up. And that little alligator leapt up. I swear that it leapt up and tried to bite her hand off. And we both jumped back because we had been so naive that we didn't really believe this 2-foot-long alligator had that much power. My mother came home. It was just, guess what, Mom? She bought an alligator. My mother was so mad that she took that alligator in the aquarium, and I don't know what. Anyway, when she came back from the pet store, she had a full refund. And I have never forgotten it, of that encounter. that meant only one thing: aggression, attack, devouring, defense.
But it also, and your sister experienced this, was hypnotic in some way. That in the midst of all that, it was also alluring. And that's the other side of these powerful instinctive forces, is it's hard to take our eyes off it. And just as it is in the modern world, people can romanticize the unconscious and romanticize these primordial beings as if, they're going to make friends with something that is so extraordinarily alien.
You have really hit on something really big there, because even I was caught with my sister's fascination. I had no interest at all. She wanted all these reptiles. It was okay, but they're so unrelatable. And yet, you're right, the alligator was fascinating. So it appeals to the part of us that knows what it is and the part of us that really doesn't know what it is.
And I think the other thing that you're lifting up, Joseph, which is really important, is it has to do with our relationship with these elements. And we could think about it both sort of literally in terms of, there are these increasing accounts of these animals showing up in people's backyards or in lagoons on resorts or whatever, and endangering people, of course, because we're encroaching on their habitat and we're destroying their habitat. And so there's something about the relationship between culture and these animals that is very parallel to the relationship between ego and the dangerous, or I don't even want to say dangerous, these primordial elements of the unconscious. We ought not to be naive about it.
Yes.
Indigenous societies will often be very reverent of big predator animals like bears or crocodiles or alligators. The indigenous people in Australia have a real reverence for the alligator that lives there. Your sister was not reverent of the alligator because our culture's not.
Yeah.
And we're not reverent of the contents of the unconscious. There's this kind of hubris that comes with I want to call it the Western attitude. This sort of overly ego-oriented attitude that discounts these elements of the unconscious, thereby endangering these elements of the unconscious and kind of pushing them to the side, but it also makes them more dangerous to us.
Right, that life does not reward innocence. Although we have a tendency to find innocence seductive. We love to see innocent characters in movies. We love to think of our children as innocent. We want to protect their innocence. But in the natural world, innocence shortens your life. And nothing in nature is kind to innocence.
Right. And that's a kind of an innocence, too, toward the power of the unconscious. Let's look at a couple of dreams.
Hey, Lisa, what's been going on about your book?
Well, it was released on May 25th, and sales have been strong. And I've been receiving so many lovely emails and texts and phone calls from friends and from people that I don't know telling me how much they've enjoyed the book. And so that feels really great. The reviews on Amazon have all been glowing, and that's been really heartening. It's just really wonderful to know that this project of mine is resonating with so many people.
I'm just so happy for you. And it's such a lovely, lovely book, both deep and accessible, about the inner journey around being a mother. That's never been written about. It hasn't been out there. And that it's getting such an enthusiastic, heartfelt reception. It's wonderful.
Yeah. I would love it if listeners who've read the book could write a review on Amazon, because although there are many wonderful ones there, more is always better. So thanks in advance for that.
You've really incarnated something that was in the ethers, but needed to be pulled down, needed to be shaped in words, and needed to be made accessible. And proof in the pudding is that it's beginning to have a kind of life of its own in the collective.
Yes.
That speaks a lot to the timeliness of this.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joseph.
The analogy to a baby is just too rich and too good and too multifaceted to be missed. It's having a life of its own, which is just what we want.
That's right.
Okay, here is a dream for us to consider from a woman who is in her 40s. An alligator or a crocodile got into my mother's house, not the one I lived in full time. It snuck in and lived on the first floor. I initially fed it steak once. It was there for about a week. I neglected it. It made its way upstairs, and I fed it once more, and it died right after it ate. I felt conflicted. I let it die. It was scary, but also like a pet. I wanted to be nice to it, but wasn't. I wanted to hug it, but you can't do that. It's a crocodile, and it'll snap your head off. I haven't been in my mother's house since I was 13. I felt bad it died. It almost reverted to an infant when on its deathbed.
Well, sounds like some parent-child relationships that I have known of. That for some people, the nostalgia of perhaps going home after many years and reestablishing a relationship with a difficult mother, for instance, thinking that things are going to be warmer, more huggy, kinder, only to find that the mother that we wish we had isn't the mother that we do have. And being related to somebody who's snappy and primal and doesn't welcome a lot of warm and fuzzy behavior is difficult to adapt to. And yet in the dream, she does actually adapt to the reality of the mother crocodile, that she wants to be kind, although she keeps her distance. And while she has a kind of innocent or naive impulse to want to cuddle with it, she also knows that it's psychospiritually dangerous for her, that she needs her distance.
Yeah, I agree with most of that, but I want to feel into a slightly different place. Deb, I'm wondering if you have any context on this dream or this dreamer.
Well, simply as an adult woman and a mother herself. Of course, she hadn't been in her mother's home, because she was an adult and had been living separately for, probably since she went to college. But what I am thinking about here is the ambivalence toward the dream image of the alligator. Of do you take pity on it and do you feed it because it has life? And is that a little bit naive? And yet it's a somewhat pitiable, almost childlike creature, as if it's young, as if it is helpless.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking, which I think kind of builds on what both of you are saying, is, as we've spoken about, this is an animal with tremendous power and energy. So there's something really important about it, but it's in the wrong place. And it is not being related to correctly. It is being related to either too cruelly and dismissively, like forgetting it, or too much like a little tame pet, like I want to cuddle it. And it is not to be related to in either of those ways. So whatever this content is, and I do imagine it's something connected with her mother, because this is in her mother's house, and we've talked about how there's this link with the mother, and I imagine it probably was a somewhat difficult relationship, but it might be her own aggression, for example, her own ability to really be aggressive, and she doesn't quite know what to do with that, perhaps because I'm just going to make something up. Perhaps because her mother could be a little bit vicious and aggressive. And if we've had a difficult relationship with a parent, we can tend to really distance ourselves from their qualities, which makes it harder for us to integrate those aspects of ourself. So if my little fantasy is correct, I think this dreamer is having a hard time figuring out how to relate to her own aggression. She needs to take responsibility for it and treat it correctly, and neither treat it like a house cat, nor ignore it and let it starve.
I am also building on what you've just said, Lisa, that makes so much sense to me, and there is also the coldness.
Yes.
Of the reptilian creature and its capacity for feeling function and relationship. And it's this creature sneaks in. She says it snuck in and lived on the first floor, which is where the living room and the kitchen and so on are in most homes. And then it made its way upstairs, which is more personal space. It's usually where bedrooms are, where there's closeness and sleep and all of that kind of thing. And also upstairs, maybe rising in consciousness, the dream ego's consciousness of what's going on here.
I think that it certainly could symbolize her own primal, maternal energies, which are ambivalent, given that we are mammals. It's a difficult role model for a mammal to have. But it also reminds me of the kind of experience that adult children have, that the parent of their childhood, who might have been ferocious, like a crocodile or like a lion or a dragon for that matter, that she writes, it almost reverted to an infant when on its deathbed. And I had a very similar experience. My mother was very ferocious. As a person, she was raised in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. She was rough. She was a really rough but smart and driven woman. And it wasn't until the last year of her life, as she began to soften into dementia, that she was able to find a kind of softer, more mammalian way of relating both to her environment and her children. And the last couple of months before her life, she was tender in a way that I don't think the crocodile in her would have ever permitted. And that was really extraordinary. So there's something profound at the end of the dream when she says, it almost reverted to an infant when on its deathbed. And there is some wisdom in that, because when we are inflated by an archetypal force, like a crocodile or a lion for that matter, it often takes the decline of the body to strip the ego of the illusion of power that the archetypal infection grants, and suddenly we're returned to the tender and vulnerable part of our humanity. And I hope for this dreamer, if it is related to this mother wound, that she's able to appreciate the humanization that often happens at the deathbed.
And that maybe she can develop a different relationship with her own crocodile part.
Mm-hmm.
That where it could be cared for, but not live in the house.
Sure. Or if we take the attitude which von Franz has, that sometimes things really do die in the psyche and they don't resurrect, because things die in fairy tales and they're just permanently dead, that the death of the crocodile, which could be a paradigm for the mother, could mean that she also is able to finally bring another version of caregiving, another version of the mothering instinct that is imaged differently and perhaps much more usefully for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that energy could be integrated in a different way. Yeah.
It could look very different, as it does in the natural world. All creatures that give birth are participating in the mother archetype, but, a mother kangaroo lives very differently from a mother crocodile, which is different from a mother possum to a human mother. So it just reminds us that the same archetype can give rise to a tremendous variety of specific images and specific behaviors. And when we can access the archetypal taproot, we can reissue the drive to mother in various new ways that might be more useful for us. Here's another dream along our theme today. The dreamer is a 54-year-old male who works as a psychotherapist, and he writes, I had gone to the home of a small, meek woman because she was a writer and she was going to help me write. Her daughter was there, who was about 4 years old. Both wore A-line skirts. The woman happened to also be a crocodile handler. I waited with the little girl in the living room, and we were talking about how crocodiles were one of the most successful creatures of all time. The woman had been busy somewhere else in the house tying up a big crocodile. My sense was it was male. She had trussed it up with ropes, like an oven-ready chicken. The nylon ropes weren't thick. She pulled it along the floor as if she'd done it many times, even though she was so small. Her treatment of it, which lacked all respect and empathy, seemed out of kilter with her naive appearance. I was anxious that we were close to great danger, but she seemed oblivious, so I didn't say anything. As it was dusk, we all lay on a big bed to sleep, still clothed. But I couldn't, as the tied-up crocodile was in the room, and it felt like it might break free at any moment. He adds his context. I have been wrestling with writing a letter which could have powerful consequences. The main feelings in the dream were anxiety, anger, and frustration, and he adds, I've sometimes found myself watching crocodile videos online, enjoying the primitive fear.
I love this dream.
What do you like about it?
Well, first of all, I love the humor in it, that there's this kind of small, meek woman wearing an A-line skirt who just trusses up the crocodile.
And drags it along the floor.
It's very cinematographic, you know. I mean, I could really see it. But, and it is a little humorous, and I suspect that the unconscious is using humor to make a point, which is, well, here's what I would say about this dream. I mean, I think that the tied up crocodile sitting that might get out of the ropes at any minute is a real lively and potent image of maybe some big feeling that feels like it could get out of control quickly and be really destructive. And that might be, I mean, it might be anger. It's so interesting because he said that in the dream, the feelings were anxiety, anger, and frustration. But I was wondering when he felt anger in the dream. Like I don't hear anger in the dream. So it does make me wonder if the letter that he's been wrestling with had to do with something that made him angry, and that the crocodile in the dream is an image maybe of his anger and aggression that feels like it's inadequately contained. But the good news is, and I think that this is part of the point of the dream, is that it's actually better handled than he thinks it is, because she, his anima, is very confident and competent that all is well.
I'm also appreciating that this dreamer has been dreaming the dream on by watching crocodile videos online, and therefore moving closer to the feelings that are aroused in him and that are evoked by crocodile images. I also like that this anima figure, this very small, meek woman that he's going to go see to help him be a writer. So this is all going to be very intellectual, right? Very mental prowess oriented. She turns out to be a crocodile handler. And I have seen crocodile handlers because, again, bringing my sister back into the picture, we stopped on our way to and from Florida on several trips as children at the Ross Allen Reptile Farm or Refuge, whatever it was called. And they had, you name it, any reptile you wanted. And one of the shows was about crocodile or alligator handling. So here is this small, meek woman who's got this pretty good-sized crocodile that she can truss up like an oven-ready chicken. So the female who looks small and meek is, in fact, one pretty tough, savvy cookie. And I'm relating this to the context he provided about writing a letter that could have powerful consequences. And I'm thinking, well, there's a resource in this dream that is part of him that maybe he could access.
There's some very practical advice, which is, why don't you just tie it up and sleep on it?
That's great. That's great.
Before you send that letter.
That's terrific. Oh my gosh, these are so much fun. All right, let's take a look at another crocodilian dream. This one is the dreamer's a 28-year-old female who works as a counselor and a teacher. And here's the dream. I was sitting on the edge of my bed and saw a tiny baby lizard on the floor on the right side of my bed. My instant thought was about how long it is, even though it was fairly small. The color and texture of the skin was almost snake-like. Then 2 more appeared out of nowhere. I was getting creeped out by the way they moved across the floor. One resembled a crocodile. In fact, it literally looked like a baby crocodile. I picked up the lizard spray on my bedside, and I started to spray them and watched them slowly crumble. I sat very sadistically on the edge of my bed, enjoying watching them die. There was slight fear in me that I hope they die because I don't want them in my room, and it gave me pleasure to kill them, and also I was disgusted by the way they moved. So the dreamer says, I've had a supremely transformational 9 months. I finally left a toxic marriage. I lost my child in custody. I moved homes alone without support, and I've had to start working. The place where I am right now, though, I'm trying to stay single and struggling at how I feel I need to have a man in my life. I've struggled with codependency. Also, there was a lizard in my house the night before I dreamt about this, and I wasn't too scared of it for the first time, which made me very proud. However, I did call a male to help me get rid of the lizard. And she says the main feelings in the dream were fear, disgust, and pleasure. And she says that this isn't the first time I've dreamt of lizards. When I was moving into my own apartment, one of my biggest fears was what will happen if I'm alone and there's a lizard. Over time, it's happened 3 times, and I'm slowly overcoming the fear. Wow, I'm somewhat glad that we don't just have lizards randomly roaming through our house in Philadelphia. That's not really an issue here.
We have lizards in our house. We do.
Actually,
down
lizards
in the
are
mechanical room.
Yeah.
Little skinks running around.
Really? That's kind of cute.
Yeah. Put
Better
out a
than
mousetrap
snakes.
and caught one, and I felt really bad, and then I had to use like little nail polish remover to kind of free it up from the trap. And
No, I
set
don't.
it
Stop.
free. No,
I
it
can't.
was fine. Gave it a little bath, sent it out into the yard, but it made us think we just can't put out traps anymore. That we just can't tolerate injuring the skinks.
And I'm such a Yankee, I don't even know what a skink is.
Well, they're these wonderful little lizards, and when they're young, they have long, beautiful blue tails.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they get larger, they turn bright red. They become these tiny little dragons, but they're still just a few inches long. And they're wonderful. They eat all the insects and stuff like that. But anyway, it's not an uncommon thing to have lizards, or if you live down south, have geckos kind of running around your property. But you really, generally speaking, you welcome them because they keep down the pests.
What I'm thinking about here, just as a frame or for the dream, is that the dreamer in waking life has a very particular pronounced fear of lizards.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then she dreams of baby lizard that looks like a baby crocodile.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unusual if there are lizards in the house and you live somewhere, you have skinks, to have such a pronounced fear that there was a lizard in her house before she dreamt about it. And she had to call somebody a guy to come and help her get rid of it. And she says that one of her biggest fears is what happens if she's alone and there's a lizard. So I'm holding this thought of this fear that seems out of proportion to a real world danger, and then thinking about the dream in the context of this, what appears to be a complex.
Yes. And it feels positive to me that in a sense, that the dream ego can take on the lizard with the crocodile with her lizard spray, which is kind of hysterical that we would all have lizard spray by the bedside. Something is obviously getting constellated there, a sense of agency in the ego, that this can be handled on her own. And this is also happening in her outer life, where she did have a lizard and she was able to manage it on her own, even though she wanted to call a man to come and rescue her, as it were. But of course, I'm also concerned about this this desire to destroy this content, because where is the value in the content, right? It's something the ego wants to repress. So if I were working with this person, I'd be so interested in what the fantasies are about lizards and crocodiles. Like what inner quality is that holding for her that she is repulses her and she's having to push it away?
The other dimension, which I think bears looking at, is her ability to admit that she felt rather sadistically pleasured by what she was doing. And without knowing this person, I can't say a lot about it, but sometimes people will mask their sadistic impulses in fear because then it justifies it. Well, I was just afraid, and so therefore I killed this thing, or I shot this person. By the way, this is a story going on in the United States right now.
Absolutely.
This thing frightened me, and therefore, I killed it, sprayed it, shot it. But really underneath it is another kind of sadistic energy that can't find its way to consciousness and be grappled with using a kind of moral attitude. So then it comes in through the back door and makes something that's murderous seem reasonable. So I think that may be going on for the dreamer, but also it's happening in the collective because it is something that exists in the human psyche.
I really think that what you've just said is so potent and so full of wisdom, that we frame things as justified because we cannot acknowledge our sadistic, aggressive urges to kill. And of course, we have those urges, and Jung's Red Book is absolutely an amazing piece of evidence and work of how much consciousness edits out the wild life of the unconscious, and that all of that is there in all of us. And I'm aware in the context of this dream that our dreamer has had, she says, a supremely transformational 9 months, left a toxic marriage and lost custody of her child, moved homes, plural, alone without support, have had to start working. So there has to be a tremendous amount of feeling about all of that. And I think it is implicit in this dream.
Yeah. And my question is, what part of herself is she trying to kill off? And is it maybe some of these big feelings that were brought up by these events, which would sort of be like the dream of the crocodile wrestler that we just talked about a minute ago, that it's that sort of big feelings and you're trying to execute them instead of a kind of giving them their due.
The other thing that I think is important, because I frequently see this in dreams, I will imagine that the various symbols that present themselves to the dream ego are actually discharging highly specific psychological forces into the ego as they interact. So the lizard-like reptilian image interacts with the ego, and then the ego takes on a kind of reptilian, indifferent energy and kills the lizards without any sentimentality, much in the same way that I imagine lizards deal with their own prey, in a very unsentimental, very matter-of-fact way, and also what we might call sadistic in human beings might just be the gratification of killing something and eating it at the level of the creatures. I'm sure they enjoy the fact that their hunger is sated and they've successfully gotten themselves a dinner.
It's true.
So she's got a bit of a lizard quality, as do we all.
Yes, exactly. So it's time for us to stop. We usually transition to a dream and then stop, but we've been dealing with all of these dreams. And this has been an interesting adventure for me, I think for all three of us, to unpack this image and see what it means in the psyche and explore some dreams in which alligator, crocodiles come to life.
Yeah, and I certainly hope that all of us will go on to welcome our inner crocodilians with curiosity and delight.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.